Thanks a lot, everybody. Thanks a lot for having the possibility to. Having the possibility to be here. It's my privilege. Normally, I'm in Iceland in December, which is a good experience. However, being here in May is even better. However, I was asked to talk about this topic, how cluster management in tourism work. The answer is like if you run other clusters in other topics. But it is even more difficult. Hakon, don't mind me, running a geothermal cluster is a challenge, but running a tourism cluster is even more challenging. And I would try to explain later. I also very much enjoy to be together here with Emiliano. We are working for many, many years. But always, when we show up together, we have always very different perspectives. So I don't know what he will present, but I'm convinced he will be, at least to some extent, have showed completely different perspectives. So enjoy and pick up what you would like is the right approach. So I guess if you look all the world, if you ask successful leaders, regardless whether you have small and medium enterprises or big ones, what we can see is that those who are the outperformer in all different sectors, they agree that cooperating with others becomes even more important in the recent past. That is an annual survey of IBM. Might be you know that IBM conducts once per year a global survey asking 450 CEOs of big companies what has changed in the past. And what you can see here is that outperformers are much more open-minded to cooperate in the field of innovation compared to average companies or low performers. That means even in 2012, that means even we know that cooperation is important since many years, it is even becoming more and more important. And you can also see here, even in the last years, it became more important to cooperate with others in all fields. And it's very obvious that you have to cooperate in the tourism sector as well. For those, when it comes to innovation, what are the sources of innovation? I'm very sorry for those of you who are coming from the academia. If you see this survey, it's also an IBM survey where they ask people all around the world, what are the sources of innovation? And you know, 20, 30 years before, we had the conclusion that we have first to do research, then we have to develop prototypes, then we have to further develop the product, and then we have to look into the market who will sell the product. And at that time, R&D, academia, universities were the main sources of innovation. This picture has completely changed. I guess you will not be surprised, but if you have a look, what are the prevailing external sources of innovation? You can see business partners, competitors, clients. They are the driver for innovation. Why is joining trade fairs so important? Of course, you have to try to sell your products, but it's the best possibility to look what your competitor is doing. So that's the reason why trade fairs are so interesting, why people and companies learn so much from trade fairs. So what you can see here, academia is finished on 6th place when it comes on innovations. And without going into theory, you know, the main innovations are incremental innovations, small but very interesting innovations. When we talk about breakthrough innovations, of course, then we have to do research. But these partners are very, very important. And it's not a surprise that you are sitting here. You are business partner in the field of tourism. You are customers. You are competitors. And so it's not surprising that the main sources of innovations, even for the Icelandic tourism area, are gathered here. No surprise when it comes to internal innovations sources, of course, employees are the main important actors, and also R&D lost some of the relevance. So it's no surprise that clusters and regional networks became more and more important. What is characteristic for networks and clusters is you need organizations already participating here. Organizations are represented by individuals, by persons, and you need relationships. And if this comes together, then innovations become reality. So that is the logical reason why regional networks and clusters are so important, have proven that they are a key driver for innovation. Sounds easy. And if you go into theory and if we talk about what are the typical partners gathered in a cluster, I guess you know this picture. Normally you have universities, you have research institutions, you have small and medium enterprises, you have big companies, you have service providers and all these things. That is a typical structure of clusters. I do not want to bother you with that. But when it comes to the tourism area, it is a little bit difficult. Research institutions in tourism area, some of you will doubt about the necessity. And large and medium enterprises in clusters, in the tourism clusters, do they need each other? So when we talk about how to structure a cluster, and this morning the results, by my point of view, are brilliant. I have been briefed yesterday. My Icelandic language skills are a little bit limited. But what we can see if we look on tourism cluster, and that is a real challenge, is the structure and the main actors of tourism clusters are completely different than other areas. And that was the reason why running a geothermal cluster is a challenge, but successful running a tourism cluster even challenging. When we can look on that, the cross-cutting nature in tourism cluster, you have many heterogeneous actors. You have carriers, you have hotels, you have providers, excursion providers. So they have very different objectives, and they do not need to cooperate normally, or they not get used to cooperate. We don't have the value chain, which is typical for clusters in other areas. Everyone is cooperating independently, and everyone can even cooperate, can live without the other. So we have a very heterogeneous structure. We also have a list of shared identity. When I'm running a hotel, I don't care about the others. I'm only looking for my clients, for my guests. I don't care about the others. What is also very characteristic is I have a lot of competitors in this cluster. All hotels are competing. All excursion providers are competitors. If you look to other clusters, sometimes we have competitors in. Not always, but the number is very low compared to the tourism cluster. So the question is how I should cooperate with my competitors. That is a challenge as well. We often do not have any sophisticated business models. We have traditional actors. Running a hotel is a very traditional business. Why should I be open? And might be I offer a wireless LAN. Then I'm really innovative. But I do not need to run a high-tech when I'm running a hotel. Normally, the tourism sector is not really technologically driven, normally. So the question is, how can I innovate? How can I provide new technologies? Why do I need research in? The framework conditions are very difficult as well. You can't change the environment. If you have the sea, then you have the sea. If you don't have water, it's very difficult. So you are not that flexible like other clusters. And what is very difficult, you have a lot of small and medium enterprises and micro enterprises, 1, 2 man company, which do not have the capital to invest, which are looking for day-to-day business, which do not have a sophisticated management. Talking to them and convincing them to have a long-term investment, they will not able to follow you. So that are the challenging framework condition when you run a cluster, and that's the reason why it is so difficult to run a tourism cluster, meaning providing more than a marketing. So sometimes you can see a tourism cluster doing nothing else as regional marketing, but that is nothing we understand by a cluster, and for that you don't need these comprehensive analyses. So the easiest way is let's look how the others are doing and compare. Look what the others are doing, learn from them, and try to pick up the best. So that is for us, it's quite easy because we are comparing and benchmarking clusters all over the world, and we have a database of 450 clusters. And when I've been asked to hold this lecture, I looked into the database and have a look on tourism clusters which are well matured, which are 5 or 10 years old, and from which we can learn. And if we look, and if we compare those with others, we start with a key topic, high specialization or broad scope. That is a very important topic because with this decision you leave a lot of participants out or you gather everything. So do you focus on fishing, for example, then everyone who's not dealing with fishing is out, or is your scope to cover all aspects of tourism in Iceland? And there's no black and white. If you look to the clusters in European countries, we have some of them which are very specialized, and others, they do not have a focus. So based on the decision and the data you have collected, by my point of view, it's very important to decide small scope, several small scope, or cover everything which is possible in Iceland. And there's no rule from the others, so you can see here Polish cluster try to be highly specialized. Others are more, have a broader scope. I will show you that this cluster here in Norway, which are very precise. It is a risk, but there are pros and cons for that. What is important in any case is that you have a critical mass. And I'm very happy to see so many participants here already, members or contributors to the cluster. Sometimes we notice a tourism cluster of 10 or 20 participants. Forget about it. That is a nice network, interest group, or not a cluster. You don't have any critical mass. What you can see here is when we look at a tourism cluster, the average of them is about 100 participants. One of them have more than 400, might be a little bit too much. Some of them have much more than 50. So 100 is a good average number, and I guess we have around this number here. So you already have a certain critical mass. What is very important is when we talk about the cluster approach, that you have a very strong and centralized cluster management. It doesn't make sense that you have a nice website and you meet once or twice per year, call yourself a cluster and be satisfied with that. You have to have a very strong governance. You have to find out what is needed, how to support the actors. So the cluster management plays a very important role, and you can see here the majority of the good tourism clusters in Europe, they do have a very strong cluster management in place. What is also very important is that you have a very dedicated strategy. As I mentioned, loose bundling and cooperation and meetings is not enough. So you have to have a strategy. What do you want to reach? Why do you cooperate? What can you reach together? What could be done alone? So it is state of the art that you have a clear strategy where to go, which is agreed with all the participants. And it doesn't make sense that the cluster management writes a nice paper and nobody takes care of that. That means a good strategy within a cluster is a strategy which is agreed with all the participants, because then you are confident and then you feel committed. Because if you turn the service and the support into practice, then it is up to you to support the cluster management. The cluster management only can initiate some processes but can't do the work for you. This is a very interesting picture. It takes a while to understand. Clusters can have different priorities. For example, clusters can focus on collaborative R&D, collaborative technology development. They can focus on exchanging information. They can focus on development of human resources. They can also initiate business activities. So you have different possible trends. And the question is, what is the focus of tourism cluster? And so when we can look on the orange line, you can see here that they are often well-balanced. Innovations do play a role in tourism sector. I will explain later on why. Of course, information, matchmaking, bringing the right partners together, initiate cross-cutting innovations is a very important topic. Entrepreneurs is not at all a topic. Also, patenting, so if you like to use success indicators for tourism clusters, how many enterprises has been created, how many patents, sorry, that is not the right approach. But what we also can see here is, especially for one that is one of the leading tourism cluster, they focus on very extraordinary services, which are completely different to the others, very much depending on the specific needs of the cluster. So what we can see here is, in general, tourism clusters have a very similar focus as other clusters in other sectors as well, because the needs are very much the same. You have to be innovative as in the tourism areas. Your clients expect more and more innovative, cool solutions. You need experienced people. the partners have to be acquainted with new methodologies and new competences. You have to meet and to learn from the other what you can do together. So basically, it's not surprising that a cluster in the tourism area is operating very similar and have similar objectives to other clusters, of course, on a different level. I would like to explain here a little bit more when it comes to what kind of services are offered, but because in the end, you expect, as a participant of a cluster, you expect certain support services from the cluster management you are not able to do on your own. And when it comes to information matchmaking, you can also see high values mean high intensity. You can see here internal member matching is very important, and it does mean much more than only drinking coffee. They have to bring the right persons together with the right objectives. So the matchmaking is a very important and very difficult activities. You have to know what is needed, which kind of competences are needed. So that is a very intensive activity. Also thematic events which are only exclusively intended for the participants. That is also an added value which is very important. So that you as a member of a cluster get some knowledge which your competitors which are not in the cluster, they don't have any possibility. Of course, you have to be updated about recent trends, recent information. That is also very important, that you have the feeling that you know the trends within the cluster much earlier than the others. So it's no surprise that good cluster management, the green and the orange ones, very much focus on these trends as well. When it comes to human resources, what we see is that in Europe we are lacking very often appropriate chairs and training courses at universities and outside. So what we see is that often cluster partners agree to set up new training schemes for new areas where they do need more competences, more training. And what we also can see is that clusters make pressure on universities and training providers to come up with new training schemes which are very demand-oriented. So that is often a result of a common understanding, of a common need analysis, that you all need what kind of training is needed for your staff. And you have to agree with the cluster management how to start. Because all of you might be a small, medium enterprise there, you don't have the possibility to create such training courses. But if you go together, if you bundle your competence, if you bundle your needs, there's a critical mass even to come up with new training schemes. And also very specific training is very important. So training does play a very important role in the tourism area as well, and the cluster organization can be the right facilitator. Innovation do play a very important role. So it's very characteristic for tourism cluster that they are very active in working groups, different working groups. They can be intended technologically oriented, they can be other areas. So working groups where you bundle different needs, different interests are very important. They are very often the source of innovative products and services. So that is very typical for us as well. So I would expect that a tourism cluster normally have 5, 6, 7 different working groups in completely different areas where you come together from different sectors and to discuss how to proceed, how to solve a very specific problem. And then, as a result, you can see the solution. So sometimes you do R&D, sometimes you can solve this issue. Again, sometimes you have to approach other partners. So that is a very typical approach, even in the tourism sector. But you can see here, if you look, the blue one, if you compare this one with other clusters, of course, this is something here. Collaborative R&D projects are still a little bit an exception. So when it comes to innovation, what does it mean, innovation? Innovation can be grouped in different steps, and that is one of the biggest possibilities a tourism cluster could provide. In the end, at the beginning, you have a problem. You have to collect ideas. And that is something what a cluster management can do. Invite the right people. They know your demands. They know your competences. So they can bring together different actors of the tourism area to make some brainstorming and to consider what is needed. Normally, if you have some ideas, the next step is that you analyze, is it feasible? Are there already solutions available? Then you might be, if it's a little bit technological oriented, you have to develop something more or less technology oriented. And in the end, you have to make some evaluation, some monitoring, if whether the implementation, whether the innovation is really successful or not. And what we can see is here at the beginning, that is a field where cluster managements are very active. When it comes to the development, to turn the ideas into innovation, that is something the cluster participants can do even better. But also when it comes to the commercialization and the evaluation of the activities, that is something where cluster organization could be very active even in the tourism sector. So according to the value chain of innovations, here is something I expect a lot of activities from the cluster management and here as well. And when it comes to innovation, it's not only technology oriented, it could be marketing oriented, it could be process oriented. So that are the core areas where cluster management can contribute. So these 6 models, I will not go into detail, but those of you who are a little bit familiar with innovation, they know them quite well. What is also very important, is also a good activity of cluster management, is look for the public. And I do not mean the typical marketing of business promotion agencies. It is very important that the cluster as such has a communication strategy and makes clear what is different in this cluster, what can this cluster offer compared to others. So what we can see here, especially the clusters in the Nordic countries, the blue and the gray one, they have a very dedicated communication strategy, which helps you to attract new clients, which helps you to become visible in the public. And as you can see here in Poland, and they are not so much experienced, but here you can see they are very, very active in that field. So the question is, do we have some evidence that good cluster management in the tourism cluster can make the difference? And what you can see here, we do have some experience. We asked the cluster management of tourism cluster, what is the impact of your work? Did the companies, your partners, really benefit from being a cluster, from spending time and money to collaborate? And this impact is depending on the intensity and quality of services, meaning those clusters have shown high impact, those cluster management which have a lot of intensive services they provide. Or with other words, as more active a cluster management is, as more likely it is that it provides higher impact. So very much depends on the activity of the cluster management, and very much depends on how you support the activities of the cluster. So there is some clear evidence that being members of tourism cluster provides you more money, more clients, and a better market position. So coming back to my introduction, so what is how to do cluster management in the tourism cluster? Many steps are very similar to others. You have to analyze the demands and the actors, the needs that has been done and presented this morning. You have to turn the demands and the needs into specific services, so that's a very crucial part in the future. So how to cope with the needs and the demands you have expressed in the survey. Then these services have to be implemented. You have to measure the success of these measures. Some of them went well, some of them might be not so successful. And then you have to improve, and if you follow this cycle after a while, you will be able to implement a lot of very promising services. Some of them are not successful, then forget about them, and you can start with others. I would like to give you 3 success stories. One is a cluster in France, which was very active in hydrotherapy in the past, but they lost more and more market share. Clients moved to other areas in France when it comes to hydrotherapy. And the members of the cluster discussed how we can cope and what to do to become even more successful. And what they did is that they met, defined a strategy. Why are we losing market share? Why are the clients prefer to go to other areas? So what we can do, they put together a lot of money for a communication strategy. So everyone put some money in the pot. So in the end, they had €500,000. With €500,000, you can do a lot. much more you are able to do on your own. And they started to create a regional branding to point out why, if you're interested in hydrotherapy, why to go to that area and land and not in other areas. It was not only a marketing strategy, it was also driven by content and by a lot of other accompanying measures. And they didn't only provide a website, they provided a website which was a really experience to discover, to learn about why this is important. So among others, that was a very interesting approach to promote and to brand this area. And after a while, they gained back the first position in hydrotherapy in France, which has not been able without any cluster approach. The second topic is a little bit more related to R&D, to show you that R&D might play a role. Also in France, it deals with carbonatic gas beds. The provider, they had some issues with technologies, with how to provide this kind of therapy in a safe way. So many equipment was outdated in that area. And what they did in the cluster, they brought together the research partners, the SPAR partners, the designers, to come up with new technologies, with improved technologies, how to offer better services in the field of carbonic gas beds. So they did a lot of brainstorming workshops to discuss what is needed, how can we do better, where are our weaknesses. They invited the R&D institutions because some R&D was needed in that area. So it was the first time bringing together operators of SPAs, designers with R&D institutions. It was a very interesting activity. And in the end, they had new equipment for the providers available. They developed it. And what was also gained was that the new services, that the new equipment was much less energy consuming. And also the personnel, hydrotherapy personnel, very much benefited from these developments. And they all agree that everyone on its own will never have been able to do such activities. There was no global actor ready to invest in that area. So these results were only able to, due to the cluster approach, that the partners had similar needs. They trusted each other, and although they were competing, they cooperated and did something together, and now they're benefiting separately. What is also a success story by my point of view, not because I like the North, but that is a very different approach. Norway. So normally, at least as a German, you decide, okay, let's go to Norway, because we haven't been there for 20 years, and then let's see what we can do. Or go to Spain or to all other places. What this Norwegian cluster developed is that they developed a theme tourism. They put the fjords in the very center. That means the people are not going to Norway and visiting some fjords and lakes. No, they're interested in fjords, and the best fjords you can discover are in Norway. It's similar to Mallorca. If you are cycling, a lot of people are going to Mallorca, not going to Mallorca and take a bicycle with you. No, you want to cycle in the Mediterranean Sea, and the best place for cycling in the Mediterranean Sea is Mallorca, because the infrastructure is perfect, not only the streets, but also the ICT and a lot of fancy service for those who are cycling in that area. And that is the approach of the Norwegian cluster as well. They put the fjord and how to discover the fjord with the animals and all these things in the center. And and customers who are interested in wildlife and fjords, they don't go to Iceland, they don't go to New Zealand or America. They go to Norway, and because they would like to discover the fjords. And that is an excellent approach as well, and it could be a guideline for Iceland as well, because there are a lot of reasons to go to Iceland. But if you remember the statistics with 800,000 participants, that's also very crucial. So far, at least for us, it was fancy to go to Iceland because Iceland is something special from a German perspective. But if millions are going there, it's nothing special, so let's go to a different place. And I guess it's also very important for a long-term strategy to decide, are you looking for mass tourism, or are you still looking for exclusive, a smaller group of tourism? There's something which you can also force as a cluster to differentiate from other places. So have a look on the Norwegian example. It was very successful, and rated as one of the best approaches, and only possible because all the service providers and all actors in the Norwegian area were ready to support the thematic tourism approach. Yeah, when it comes to success factors of cluster management, I've mentioned them here. They are very similar for tourism cluster management as for others. The cluster emergence is important, so you have to have a bottom-up cluster, not a top-down cluster, which is given here. You have to have sustainable financing, you have to have good cluster skills, and all other topics which are very important for cluster management excellence, and these are the same whether you run a tourism cluster or a geothermal cluster. That's it. So I hope I was in time and give you some inside view that it is a challenge, but it's not impossible to run a good tourism cluster. Thanks a lot.